For years, people saw Mike Tyson as a force of nature and athlete whose presence alone was enough to shake an entire arena. But behind the thunderous roar of the crowds and the highlight reels that defined a generation, there was another story quietly unfolding. Now, at 59, that story has taken a heartbreaking turn. What happened to the man once called the most unstoppable fighter alive has left fans around the world stunned, emotional, and searching for answers. Today, Tyson stands in a place few ever expected to see him, physically drained, emotionally exhausted, and carrying the weight of a lifetime filled with battles far tougher than anything he faced in the ring. Those who followed his journey knew he struggled, but no one realized just how deep those struggles ran. Even the strongest fighters eventually break in places the world cannot see, and for Tyson, the hidden wounds have finally come to the surface. People close to him say the change has been gradual, quiet, subtle, and far more painful than anything captured by cameras. His recent appearances show a man fighting not an opponent, but time, memory, and the toll of everything he endured. And when the truth finally emerged, it left even his most loyal supporters shaken. What really happened to Mike Tyson at 59 is something no one was prepared to confront. Mike Tyson's later years looked peaceful. He spoke calmly in interviews, smiled more often, and seemed to have finally reached a place of balance after decades of turbulence. But beneath that calm exterior, a different reality was unfolding, one shaped by years of physical strain, emotional burdens, and the quiet battles that come with growing older after a lifetime of intensity. At 59, Tyson faced challenges that few could understand, challenges that weighed on him far more heavily than anything he encountered. During his career at its peak, those close to Tyson began noticing small but significant changes. His energy, once explosive and commanding, appeared to fade. His movements, once sharp, fast, and precise, had slowed in ways his fans were not prepared to see. Tyson himself admitted on several occasions that the years of fighting, training, and pushing his body to extremes had caught up with him. The sport that made him a legend also left behind marks that time could not erase. His body had absorbed more than any athlete should endure, and at this stage of his life, the consequences were becoming impossible to hide. But the physical toll was only part of the story. Tyson's emotional journey was equally profound. His life had been built on chaos, rising to fame almost overnight, then falling into difficult periods that brought overwhelming pressure. As he grew older, the memories of those years resurfaced with surprising intensity. Tyson began speaking more openly about the moments that haunted him, the regrets he carried, and the people he lost along the way. These reflections were not the confident statements of a retired champion. They were the quiet, vulnerable admissions of a man who had lived through extraordinary highs and devastating lows. The people who worked with him noticed his mood shifting. Tyson often appeared deep in thought, sometimes distant, as if he were wrestling with things he could not easily discuss. Friends said that he would talk about wanting peace, yet struggled to truly feel it. His past, with all of its triumphs and heartbreaks, followed him into every new chapter. And while he tried to stay strong for his loved ones, the emotional weight grew heavier with each passing year. Public appearances revealed a side of Tyson that many had not seen before. His voice, once firm and commanding, became softer. His eyes, though still filled with the intensity that defined him, carried a sadness that was hard to ignore. Fans who watched him closely could sense that something inside him had changed, and that the legendary confidence he once displayed had been replaced by something more fragile. Tyson spoke openly about fear, reflection, and the pain of watching time reshape his world. Despite the difficulties he faced, Tyson continued to show incredible resilience. He tried to stay active, to remain involved in projects that inspired him, and to keep moving forward even on the hardest days. But age, combined with the physical and emotional toll of his past, created a barrier he couldn't simply push through. The reality of slowing down hit him harder than any punch he ever received in the ring. It was not just a loss of strength, it was the realization that the identity he had carried for so long was slowly slipping away. Those closest to him said the most heartbreaking part was seeing Tyson question himself in ways he never had before. He wondered what more he could have done, what he could have changed, and whether he had finally reached the end of the battles that defined his life. This emotional struggle, private, silent, and deeply human, became one of the most difficult chapters he had ever faced. By the time he reached 59, the truth was undeniable. Tyson was no longer fighting opponents. He was fighting the overwhelming weight of his own history. And as those final pieces of his past came rushing back, the world began to see a man once celebrated for unmatched strength, now confronting the fragility of life itself. As Mike Tyson entered his 50s, many believed the darkest storms of his life had finally passed. After years of setbacks, explosive scandals, financial ruin, and personal turmoil that once dominated headlines, Tyson seemed to rise again with remarkable strength. He rebuilt his public image, reconnected with his family, and even found new purpose through podcasts, business ventures, and a calmer lifestyle grounded in self-reflection. But beneath this renewed success, a quiet struggle was beginning to overwhelm him, one far more personal than anything he had ever faced in the ring. Friends close to Tyson noticed how drastically his demeanor changed. The once unstoppable fighter, known for his confidence and intensity, had moments where he looked lost, weighed down by memories he could no longer outrun. He began opening up about internal battles that fame, money, and power could never shield him from. Even though Tyson was accustomed to being seen as indestructible, he now spoke more openly about feeling fragile, haunted by regrets and past choices that shaped both his greatness and his suffering. As he stepped into a new decade of life, Tyson admitted the emotional toll of aging hit him harder than the blows from any opponent. He talked about waking up some days unable to recognize the man he once was. Trauma from childhood, complicated relationships, and years of surviving in survival mode had left scars that time refused to heal. His sense of identity felt fractured. He often questioned whether he deserved the peace he was trying to build. What made this period even more heartbreaking was Tyson's growing fear of becoming irrelevant. For a man whose life had been defined by dominance, attention, and the roaring energy of the crowd, silence felt like a punishment. The fame that once elevated him now seemed to slip through his fingers. People who followed his journey noticed the shift. He wasn't trying to shock audiences anymore or chase the spotlight. Instead, he was trying to understand himself, something he never truly had time for in the violent, fast-paced world where he grew up. His health also became a rising concern. Tyson spoke openly about chronic pain, the result of years of brutal fights that pushed his body far beyond its limit. Some days he struggled to walk normally, and he would discuss feeling physically trapped in a body that no longer obeyed him. Though he tried to maintain discipline and train regularly, the reality of aging hit him with a force he could not dodge. Even more painful was how emotional triggers began resurfacing. Tyson confessed that certain memories, especially those tied to deep personal losses, brought him to tears unexpectedly. Losing close friends, facing complicated relationships, and carrying the weight of past mistakes left him vulnerable in ways the public rarely saw. The world saw Tyson the legend. Tyson saw a man trying desperately to heal from everything he had been through. During this sensitive period, Tyson became afraid of letting the people he loved down. He often expressed guilt that his past actions had hurt those closest to him. Even when they forgave him, he struggled to forgive himself. This emotional weight made him withdraw at times, distancing himself from crowds and fame to avoid being overwhelmed. Interviews revealed a man who was no longer fighting opponents, he was fighting inner battles that grew heavier with each passing year. The tragedy wasn't in what the world could see. The tragedy lived inside the quiet moments when he looked in the mirror and didn't know if he was proud of the man staring back. For someone who spent his entire life surviving chaos, the challenge of finding peace became the hardest fight of all. As Mike Tyson continued navigating the emotional weight of his later years, a new and unexpected challenge began unfolding behind the scenes, one that would push him into one of the darkest chapters of his life. Those close to him revealed that Tyson had started isolating himself more than usual. He spent long hours alone, often reflecting on the ghosts of his past, replaying moments he wished he could erase. Even though he tried to distract himself with business ventures, interviews, and appearances, the internal pressure quietly intensified. Tyson had always been open about fighting addiction, fear, and mental health struggles. But now those battles were resurfacing with alarming strength. The spotlight he once embraced felt unbearable. Every public outing required emotional energy he no longer had. The crowd that once gave him confidence now made him feel exposed, vulnerable, and overwhelmed. People around Tyson noticed he was slipping into old patterns, becoming restless, irritable, and withdrawn. His nights became longer, filled with anxiety and unease. The strong, intimidating presence that made him a legend faded into a quiet, exhausted shell of a man who was trying desperately to keep himself from falling apart again. His close friends worried that Tyson was carrying years of trauma without any outlet strong enough to hold the weight. He often talked about feeling like a prisoner to his own memories, childhood pain, public humiliation, and the emotional burden of losing some of the most important people in his life haunted him daily. Even moments that should have brought joy, family gatherings, career milestones, and personal achievements were overshadowed by a deep sadness he couldn't shake. His health struggles added a crushing layer to the turmoil. Tyson began experiencing more frequent pain, especially in his back and joints, making it harder to stay active. Doctors warned him that his body was showing the long-term consequences of decades spent in one of the most demanding sports in the world. This wasn't something he could out-train or out-fight. It was permanent damage. That reality devastated him. Tyson had always defined himself by his physical strength, and the idea of losing that identity felt like losing a part of his soul. He often described the feeling as watching the warrior disappear, and as his body declined, his emotional stability followed. The pressure mounted further when private conflicts began spilling into his personal relationships. Tyson feared becoming a burden to the people he loved. His mood swings, exhaustion, and emotional distance created tension. Even though his family supported him, Tyson couldn't shake the guilt of feeling like he wasn't enough. That guilt ate away at him, making him withdraw even more. His friends revealed he struggled with the idea of being remembered not as a champion, but as a broken version of the man he once was. That thought alone pushed him into a state of emotional crisis. At one point, Tyson openly admitted on his podcast that he sometimes felt terrified of his own thoughts. He spoke about looking in the mirror and feeling like time was speeding past him, leaving behind only the mistakes he wished he could undo. He confessed to waking up in the middle of the night overwhelmed with fear of death, fear of aging, fear of becoming irrelevant, and most painfully, fear of disappointing the people who still believed in him. These confessions shocked his fans. Tyson, the most feared boxer of his era, was revealing a pain deeper than any punch he had ever taken. Despite the emotional unraveling, Tyson tried to maintain a sense of control. He meditated, exercised when possible, and leaned on the few people he trusted. But the struggle never fully eased. What made this chapter of his life so heartbreaking was that Tyson was no longer fighting opponents in a ring. He was fighting the shadows of everything he had lived through, and for the first time, he wasn't sure he had the strength to win this battle. In the months that followed, Mike Tyson's emotional and physical decline became impossible to ignore. Even during public appearances, fans noticed that something seemed deeply wrong. His once powerful voice had taken on a quieter, almost fragile tone. His movements appeared slower, guarded, and weighed down by discomfort. Tyson tried to smile through the pain, but those who had watched him for decades could see that the fierce warrior, who once dominated the world, was now fighting an invisible battle that seemed far more brutal than anything he faced in the ring. Behind the scenes, the people closest to him revealed that Tyson's moments of strength came in waves, but so did the moments of deep sorrow. As his inner battles intensified, Tyson began talking more openly about his fear of mortality. He expressed that he felt time slipping through his fingers faster than ever. The reality of aging hit him harder than any punch ever had. He confessed that every new ache, every moment of weakness, reminded him that he wasn't invincible anymore. He worried constantly about leaving unfinished business, unresolved conflicts, and unspoken love behind. Tyson's childhood trauma, the losses he endured throughout his life, and the pressure of his legacy all collided in a way that became overwhelming. He once said he feared that when he was gone, people would only remember his mistakes, not the man he tried so hard to become. The most heartbreaking moment came when Tyson privately admitted to a close friend that he didn't know how much longer he could keep pretending to be strong. He felt like he was living two separate lives, one for the cameras, where he forced himself to seem steady and calm, and one behind closed doors, where he wrestled with fear, exhaustion, and emotional pain. Even when surrounded by people, Tyson often felt alone, trapped inside his own thoughts. He struggled to sleep, struggled to stay motivated, and struggled to convince himself that things would ever get better. Those closest to him said he started withdrawing even more, sometimes disappearing into his room for hours, with no desire to speak or interact. Health concerns added even more tension to his life. Tyson experienced episodes of sudden weakness, dizziness, and severe pain that frightened everyone around him. Doctors urged him to slow down immediately, stressing that his body could no longer handle stress or intense activity. Tyson didn't argue, he simply nodded, acknowledging silently that his greatest fear was becoming true. The man who once stood unshaken in front of giants now found himself unable to trust his own strength. Every step, every breath, every simple movement felt heavier than the last. Tyson's decline wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, slow, and deeply painful to watch. And yet, even in his weakest moments, Tyson showed sparks of resilience. He tried to stay connected with his fans, recording short messages of gratitude. He spent more time with his family, cherishing the moments of peace he could find. But those moments never lasted long. He admitted that some days he felt like he was disappearing, piece by piece, unable to hold on to the version of himself that the world admired. In one emotional conversation, Tyson reflected on everything he had survived: poverty, fame, betrayal, addiction, and loss, and said that the battles he faced now felt heavier than all the others combined. His fans were heartbroken when insiders revealed how fragile Tyson had become. People who grew up watching him dominate the boxing world could hardly process the idea that their hero was struggling so deeply. Tyson had always been larger than life, a symbol of power, survival, and unbreakable will. But now, at this stage of his journey, he was confronting the most painful truth of all. No matter how strong a person once was, time eventually humbles everyone. The tragedy of Mike Tyson's story wasn't just his physical decline. It was the emotional weight he carried, the battles he fought alone, and the heartbreaking realization that even legends can crumble in silence.